So I always like to remind people that like on the sleep deprivation side or having bad quality sleep, you're making your life really, really, really hard because you're fighting willpower, right? All right, what's up, everybody? Happy December now by the time you guys are probably seeing this. I'm shooting this actually right before Thanksgiving, and I wanted to kind of talk on sleep. I think this is one that for me personally, it was funny. I was just telling Jazz and Elliot and my wife this morning. I was like, when I was going through all the prep last night, I was like, okay, I want to do the sleep one. And then I need to figure out what I want to do for the following week. And of course, it's like, I wake up this morning, I had just terrible sleep. And I was like, the irony in that one. But we're going to talk about sleep because this is obviously something when you guys think about health, wellness, your energy, how you feel, longevity, it's such a big part of the conversation. And I think it's one that unfortunately doesn't get enough resources and energy dedicated towards trying to fix. A lot of us just know it's important, right? Like we all hear that. Like I remember listening to a podcast earlier this year and he's like, if you could take one magic pill that would like improve your energy, improve your lifespan, improve your health span, improve your coordination, improve your hormones, improve your insulin sensitivity, improve your recovery, improve the way you think, would you take it? And it's like, yeah. And it's like, of course, but that's sleep. Like sleep is the thing that obviously is going to drive as much optimal health towards us and recovery and how we feel. So I kind of want to basically just go two ways with this conversation today. I want to talk about obviously what sleep deprivation is actually doing to us on kind of like the hormonal side and things like that. And then I want to kind of segue obviously into some of the things that you should be doing to change to hopefully optimize the way that you are sleeping, right? And I know for some of us, like sleep is one of those things with jobs or kids, more importantly, that like you kind of are just handcuffed to the situation that you're in as far as like timing and schedule goes. But even no matter what your circumstance is, there's obviously things that we can do to kind of optimize it. Because I will say, like when I talk about movement and exercise and I talk about nutrition and I talk about obviously sleep today, I talk about stress management a lot. And then the bottom two tiers of the dimensions for me are kind of like your community and your environment and your mindset. And I've always said that like, more specific on the stress side, generally on like the front end when I'm talking to a new client is like, hey, if you're stressed out, I literally just had this conversation last night with an assessment. It's going to impact the way you sleep, right? And your sleep's going to suffer. It's going to impact the way you digest your food. It's going to impact the food choices that you're going to make. It's going to impact the recovery around your workouts. It's going to impact the motivation to even do your workouts. And then obviously can trickle down or up depending on what we're looking at. And that obviously has negative consequences, right? So I want to start a little bit more in kind of like the relationship to food because, I'm obviously I'm going through a little bit of setting up the nutrition challenge for next year. We try to do one every year at the beginning of the year, like January time, because I feel like A, most of us are more motivated to do so. And B, I think when you get out of the holiday season, it just tends to be one of those things that suffers a little bit. Why I wanted to bring up sleep, it's funny because like every time I go through the daylight savings time, I personally feel like I kind of go backwards in my sleep. Like, and you would think that like the winter time with it getting darker a little bit earlier, that we would shut down a little bit earlier, that you would have more recovery. And I was literally just talking about this like an episode or two ago, like what we should do to change and optimize in the winter. And I'm not joking. Since that episode, I feel like I really haven't had the best sleep, but I will say transparently that I also just have not been doing the stuff that I need to be doing to really optimize the quality of the sleep as well, right? So on the nutrition front, right? Two things I like to talk about when we think about the sleep itself, right? So when you're thinking about sleep deprivation, right? We think about like the optimal window that most of us should be sleeping is anywhere from like 7 to 9 hours, right? There are certain like chronotypes of humans that can get away with a little bit less sleep or need a little bit more sleep, but if you were to look at the mean and the average here, we're looking at like, hey, 7 to 9 hours in bed, right? And the reason why I like to say in bed with quotations is because you got to remember that your time in bed does not mean time asleep. If you guys are ever anybody that's tracking anything, this is actually something I'm going to talk about next week on next week's episode. You'll notice that there's going to be periods of you being awake. There's going to be stages of you having light stages of sleep. Then there's going to be deep stages and REM stages, right? And when you think about these restorative stages of sleep, those are going to happen on the deep and those are going to happen on the REM, right? You're obviously not getting the quality, A, awake, and B, more importantly, on the light stages of sleep. So we really want to optimize on, yes, quantity is going to be important. No matter what, like it's hard to really, you can optimize the quality, to a very, very high degree and get away with maybe doing the 6 or 7, and like and I think about this from like a longevity perspective because like my wife and I used to always talk about this prior to the pandemic. Like prior to the pandemic, my entire life working or school, even whatever it was, I always woke up early and I always went to bed late, right? When I was a kid, my parents were always like, "You're always the kid that needed the most sleep out of all, the brothers." So for me, I feel like I grew up and I was always someone that could like I can go to bed early and like sleep a long time too. So like I was more like the 8 to 10 hours felt like a good spot for me. And I think that's something really important to pay attention to for yourself too. Is like, there's going to be some subjective reading and there's going to be some objective data if you're tracking it. But on the subjective side, most importantly, is like how are you waking up? Are you feeling good when you wake up in the morning? Are you feeling energized? Or is it this just very long, groggy thing, or you don't have motivation to go into the day? You feel like you don't have the attention span that you normally have. You feel like you don't really normally have the motivation to go through whatever it might be. Those are obviously going to be easy cues to be like, okay, maybe the quality of my sleep, even if I was in bed for that time, is going to suffer. So coming back to the hormones, there's two things right off the bat that I like to remind people, right? Ghrelin is a hormone that's going to tell us to eat, right? Leptin is going to be the hormone that's going to be what we call the satiety signal, right? So we want to think about, we want leptin, obviously. I don't want to say like we're trying to raise leptin or lower ghrelin necessarily, but when you're sleep deprived or not sleeping a lot or good quality, you actually have leptin levels start to rise, or leptin levels start to drop, and ghrelin levels start to rise, right? So what we're having, and generally what most of the research that I found is like a 20% delta, right? So anywhere between like a 15 to 20% rise or decrease, right? So if you think about the delta between both of them, it could be like a 30% difference between a 15% rise and a 15% drop. Now think about that as far as calories, right? So just start with that. If you're having a hormone, right, that is reduced, that's going to allow your body to understand when it's satiated and full, and you're having another hormone that's obviously encouraging you to eat and giving you the cravings to eat. And anybody that's ever not slept well or had a terrible night of quality of sleep or drank too much at Thanksgiving and you woke up the next day and you were craving crap food all day, that a lot, it is the blame is the hormones, right? Because like you're having your body at a very biological level craving more fats, craving more sugar, right? And just overall craving more calories, right? So if you were to just use the 20% number just to make math really easy, let's imagine you were someone that was eating 2,000 calories a day. That means if I had a 20% increase in cravings, that I would increase maybe my caloric intake by 400 calories, right? 20% of 2,000 equaling that 400 number I'm talking about. So when you think about weight loss, which is what majority of us are working towards, right? Or you think about optimizing body composition or weight, whatever it might be, calories are obviously a huge part to this conversation. So I always like to remind people that like on the sleep deprivation side or having bad quality sleep, you're making your life really, really, really hard because you're fighting willpower, right? And the thing that I like to remind people is also someone that's underslept does not have a lot of willpower. There's this quote by this guy, Alex Hormozy, that I follow, and he always says, he goes, I never make a big decision with anything in life, like especially with business decisions, on days that I don't sleep well. He goes, I make sure that I make the biggest decisions that I need to make for my business or my life when I'm slept well, right? And it's kind of a weird thing when you think about that as like business advice, but it is so true, right? Because like the most educated, mature, responsible decisions that you're going to make is when your body's in a good place with its energy and your body's well recovered and well slept and well fueled. And when it's underslept, it's very easy to make irrational decisions, right? So coming back to the food is like, think about this, is like biologically, you have your hormones encouraging you to eat more, right? And then when you think about the psychological aspect of it, it's very easy because your willpower is so low to cave to some of those things. So it's not that like, oh, I have cravings, I can just fight it with willpower. It's like, yeah, there's an aspect of that, but like it's very far and few between of the amount of people that actually have the discipline to do so, right? Like you really kind of have to be a unicorn to be able to fight that a lot. And imagine if you were someone that's chronically underslept, right? If you're someone that's always underslept, like coming back to like how it was pre-pandemic for my wife and I, it's like we would go to bed. I was always going to bed probably like an hour early on the couch. I would maybe go to bed at like 11, right? And she would go to bed like midnight, but we'd wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, right? So it's like you think about like 5-ish hours of sleep, and depending on the quality of that sleep, and then doing that 5-6 days a week for work, that's not an ideal place for health, right? Like a lot of things are going to suffer on that aspect. So that's kind of like the first point that I wanted to touch on, right? The follow up to that too is also you have a huge drop in your insulin sensitivity. We want to be insulin sensitive, right? Insulin sensitivity allows us to move the carbohydrates and the sugars out of the bloodstream and into the muscles and into storage, right? And we're actually making use of these carbohydrates or quote unquote glucose and glycogen, right? So when you're dropping your insulin sensitivity, you're borderline just insulin resistant for the day, right? And, there's Matthew Walker talks about this in Why We Sleep. And if you've never read his book, this is a phenomenal book. And I would say a much better book than what I can give you today. I'm going to give you my spark notes on what I've learned over time. But he always says, he's like, one of the best studies that we have is daylight savings time. And I don't know the stats off the top of my head, so I'm not going to really say a number. But he's like, hey, when we lose an hour of sleep, right? When whatever time change that is, the fall of the spring one, he goes, we have a pretty big bump in heart attacks, in car crashes, and things like that. And it's just interesting that like we can use, however many billion of people that are going through a daylight savings time as data for us to go, the impact of losing 1 hour and the difference it makes that following day and week, right? Or the exact opposite, the reduction of those things that happen. So he talks about it pretty well in the book, and I thought that was like a pretty eye-opening fact. But the insulin sensitivity part, when you think about nutrition, right? And you think about what is insulin itself. So like when I eat, I was just telling the guys, I was like, we bought a bunch of cinnamon rolls for Thanksgiving last week. And I was like, oh, like, can I have one of these, or are these all for Thanksgiving? And I had one last night, and it destroys my sleep. I don't know what it is about cinnamon rolls specifically as a dessert for me, but like it fucks me up. It's like my heart rate was high all night. When I used to do the continuous blood glucose monitor, it would be interesting to kind of see like how long it would take me to get back to baseline. So, a fact on insulin sensitivity is we are the most insulin sensitive when the sun is shining, right? So like one of the nutrition tips that I try to give people is like, we want to optimize eating around windows when we're insulin sensitive, right? Because when you're not insulin sensitive, right, you become borderline insulin resistance, right? And that's where things like type 2 diabetes come from, or borderline pre-diabetic for some people, is because we're really not able to take those things out of the bloodstream that are toxic to the body. And that's what insulin's role is, right? So when you're eating something like rice or a sugary drink or a cinnamon roll like me last night, what your body's going to do is it's going to release insulin, right? And insulin is going to be that thing that's going to be the transporter to get it out of the blood, put it into the muscle, store it into the liver, and actually make it usable glucose for us later, right? So it's something that's totally normal, and it's something that every healthy individual should have, right? Now, when you're insulin resistant, the example and the analogy I like to give people is like almost think about like you staring at the sun every day and eventually going like, well, why do my eyesight feel like it's getting worse? Like you're burning out the receptors basically, right? It almost becomes numb to it. And then like the insulin being the thing that unlocks the key to the cell to get those things into it no longer becomes effective. So then you start to run into, like I said, this borderline pre-diabetic, or this is what leads to type 2 diabetes down the road. And then now it's like, think about all three of those things I just talked about. The ghrelin, when you think about the leptin, right? When you think about the lack of insulin sensitivity that we have, that becomes a very dangerous rabbit hole to go down when you're thinking about optimizing nutrition, right? When you're thinking about optimizing your weight or optimizing your body composition. So I always like to kind of frame that for people. I talk about that even I did a nutrition masterclass for the clients. This is probably about 4 years ago. And I generally try to do this when I'm doing the nutrition challenge to kind of educate people that like most of us know what we think ideal nutrition looks like, right? I don't really think that like my job is necessarily to educate people that like you should be eating lots of produce, ideally seasonal and local, right? That you should be eating things that have walked, flown, or swam before, so animal sources of protein, and keeping 80+% of your diet around those things, right? And if you don't, you start to segue into what we consider processed foods, things that come in bags and boxes and barcodes. And that, not necessarily quote unquote unhealthy, but it can lead to a place where we really have a hard time fighting the signals of satiety because those foods are literally engineered for you to eat more, right? And your body goes through the cravings of having lots of carbs and fats in accommodation together. And those unfortunately tend to be what we consider to be the tastiest foods for most of us. And that's where a lot of overeating comes from. So that's why I like to remind people when you think about the nutrition side of it. So coming back to sleep. Think about that as a foundation, right? Like if you're trying to go optimize your nutrition and you are just chronically stressed or chronically underslept or chronically both, you're spinning your wheels and you're really working uphill, right? It's making your life a lot harder. And this is unfortunately where I believe like so many of us actually quit because it's so hard, right? Or the amount of effort you're actually giving is not returning the results that you're looking for, right? And the time frame that you're looking for. Like people say like, "Oh, I should be able to lose like 1 or 2 pounds a week." And some people are losing like 1 or 2 pounds a month, right? And the slower it is, the harder it is to kind of motivate ourselves, right? So motivation is going to be a derivative of like the progress that you're making in life. So I always like to remind people that like, let's look at the foundational items, right? For me, normally with like sleep and stress, like the way I look at it as a coach is like, I'm not going to pay attention to that yet because I want to look at like, let's optimize your daily movement and how you're moving. Let's optimize your training routine and exercise planning. Let's optimize kind of how you're eating a little bit or a lot of it for some of us. And then based off those results, then I kind of get deeper, right? But if I don't see results or I don't see the pace of the results that I would like to see as a coach, then I say, okay, now let's look under the hood, right? Let's look at like, how are you feeling as far as stress levels go, right? Are we in a season where we're a little bit more stressed? Are we chronically stressed? How is sleep? How's the quantity? How's the quality? Are we tracking it? Are we not tracking it? So those are big things in relationship to nutrition. Now on the training side, when you think about this, so let's look at sleep itself. Most of your deep stages, right? Ideally, we want to get about an hour and a half, minimum of an hour, but an hour and a half to 2 hours of deep stages of sleep, right? So these slow wave stages. That's going to happen on like the first third of your sleep, right? So if you think about like, okay, I'm sleeping 8 hours, right? The first like 2 to 3 hours is where you're going to get almost 90+% of your deep stages, right? And I'm going to touch on later when I go about fixing it of like why certain things that have a negative impact on deep stages of sleep. But this is where your body, like your brain has something called a glymphatic system. Your body has a lymphatic system, right? Unfortunately, lymphatic system does not have a pump like a heart for the cardiovascular system, right? So like the lymphatic system, I always like to remind people like movement is the thing that gets rid of the waste, the cellular waste. So we want exercise, we want movement, we want massage, we want heat, we want things that allow us to kind of get these things moving. Now, in the glymphatic system, your body goes through this natural cellular wasting and kind of cleanup in a sense during deep stages of sleep. So you can imagine if I'm missing a big chunk of my quality of sleep on the deep side, that you're missing a lot of that, right? Another thing with deep sleep is we look at the growth hormone release, right? Growth hormone is one of those sweet hormones in life that is going to allow us to actually burn fat correctly, allow us to build muscle. There's a lot of benefit on the cellular side as well when you think about growth hormones. So that's the deep side, right? Then when you look at REM stages, right? REM stages is where you're going to get even more lymphatic kind of clean out. And this is where we think about like the dreaming side of sleep, right? So this is when you think about memory reconsolidation, those type of things. That's going to happen a lot on the REM side, right? So, I don't know if anybody's ever felt like this, but like if you feel like you're under sleep and like sometimes you feel like I don't feel like I can even speak correctly. I feel like I can't connect my words. I feel like my thought process is a lot slower, right? Like you just feel like you're not computing well. That is one of those unfortunate side effects of not getting the quality of sleep that we're looking for, right? I've had some nights where I don't sleep, quote unquote, a lot of time, but I feel like I had really, really deep sleep, right? When I was a kid and I was younger, you couldn't really wake me up if you tried. Like someone can break into my house and I probably wouldn't wake up. Now, as I've gotten older, and I will say it's a lot of this stuff that some of it being self-inflicted, where I become a little bit lighter of a sleeper, and I had to change some of those things to actually keep me in that deep stage of sleep, right? Even something like this morning, for example. It's like my wife was training and had her personal training session like 6:30 in the morning. And I had to get up just to kind of get some work done. So I was like, well, just wake me up when you leave. And then she like ended up like sleeping in, I think. And like, I remember like most days I always tell her, I'm like, just don't, like she always likes to say, I want to give you a kiss and tell you goodbye. I'm like, if I'm in deep sleep and you hear me snoring, I'd prefer not to be woken up, right? She's the opposite. She doesn't matter if she went to bed an hour ago. If I'm leaving for something to go golf, she's like, give me a kiss, tell me you're going goodbye. Me, I'm like such a hoarder of my good sleep. And like, I will say that I get really good sleep the first couple hours of the night, right? And then depending on where I'm at in life and the season of stress or whatever it might be, generally that middle of like 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock or 2 to 4 sometimes. Like sometimes I feel like I get a little like I turn and toss a little bit. And then I can generally get back into a good quality of sleep and then I can get back into that dream state. But the ideal thing is obviously I want to have unbroken sleep, right? For 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, whatever it might be for you guys. Having that quality sleep throughout that entire duration is the goal, right? But like I said, there's going to be changes in life with stress. Some of you are going to have kids where you have to get up no matter what. There's going to be changes in life with time changes in weather. Like there's all these things that are naturally just going to impact us. So I always say like that is the goal, but it's also not the reality for some of us. So from a muscle development side, from a muscle recovery side, and then also from the motivation, right? I like the thing that I touched on a little bit earlier that I want to wrap this part up with is like the willpower, the desire, the, discipline, all these things that a lot of us kind of think are just quote unquote more mental and more like, oh, I just got to talk myself into it. They really are built off the foundation of the quality of sleep you're getting. Because like if you are not sleeping well, you are having a really, really unlikely chance that you're actually going to be able to maintain the discipline and the willpower and the motivation to do so. So I always tell people on the exercise front is like, yeah, from a fat burning oxidation perspective, from a muscle building perspective, but also from a more important, the energy that you have, right? Like obviously sleep is one of those interesting things where we have to shut off to regain our energy. Just like food gives us energy, sleep is the obviously number one thing of that. So imagine all the impact that it's going to make on everything else. And then the bidirectional relationship of stress and sleep, right? Because like when you're chronically stressed, it's going to impact sleep. But when you're underslept, your body is going to become physiological stressed. So it's this kind of chicken and the egg story of like, which one am I addressing? And the answer is like, it's always both. But I will say the foundational piece should be sleep, right? So let's kind of segue now into like, how do I address optimal sleep, right? Like, what are the things that you should make as non-negotiables for you guys to make sure that like getting the best sleep of your life, like what are the things that we need to look at? So number one thing right off the top of my head, the consistency of when you go to bed and when you wake up, right? This is one of the most important things that you guys can do from a circadian rhythm perspective, right? Understand that every biological process in the human body is on a circadian clock, meaning it has a 24-hour cycle, right? So when you think about the release of melatonin at night, the things that makes us sleepy, when you think about the release of cortisol being highest in the morning, the thing that wakes us up, when you think about the release of growth hormone at night during the deep stages of sleep, when you think about our body temperature, our highest blood pressure, our lowest blood pressure, there's this clock that does everything hormonally for us, right? And we want to make sure that we're optimizing our circadian rhythm, right? This is why I cannot stand the daylight savings time, because I feel like it just throws us all off for, a week or 2 weeks or a couple of days, depending on who you are and how you recover from it. But I think it also throws our clock off because our jobs are not changing, right? Like I think the daylight savings time, if I might be wrong on this, but I want to say it was for like farming practices or something like that. But it's like, most of us ain't farmers, right? Most of us are working jobs that have fixed hours. And it's like normally when I get off of work, the sun's still shining. And then it's like this time of year, even without the change, the sun's going to set a little bit earlier. But now it's like, oh, fuck, I still got 2-3 hours left and it's already dark. That sucks. So coming back to that, like from a practice perspective, try to do your best 7 days a week to have the very similar going to bed and a very similar time of you waking up. Because the more that you can have that in alignment, the more aligned your circadian rhythm's going to be. And that's just going to make everything else so much easier to do so. So I put that as number one because I do believe personally that that is one of the most important things that we can do to optimize it, because your body becomes habitual, right? Your body becomes, even not from just physiological practices, circadian biology, but also from the psychological things, right? Like you just think about some of the habits that we do. It's like, for me, it's like as soon as I finish my workout, I always get my second coffee of the day. Right. I'm like, yeah, get my second coffee. And I don't even think about it. Sometimes like, I don't even know if I necessarily even need this coffee, but like, it's just a habit. So from a physio and a psycho, those are both things that we want to make sure that we're keeping in line. Second thing is like, you have to understand the power of light. Light is the kind of precursor for us to really align circadian rhythm once again, right? So you probably heard, the infamous Andrew Huberman talks about this a lot. I think probably put this on the map more than anybody, that like, hey, well, the first thing in the morning, within an hour or two, wake up, get outside, right? Get your feet on the earth, get some sun in your eyes, get some sun on the skin, because that light and that absorption of that light through the eyes and the skin is what allowing the body to go, okay, and that's going to help us get into a healthier rhythm of when we're actually going to start to release melatonin, right? And like that blue light in the middle of the day versus the near and red infrared light that we get in like sunrise and sunset. They all on the full spectrum of light are very powerful for the coding of putting us into a correct circadian biology, right? So look at sleep times. Look at doing something to get you outside first thing in the morning. I will say personally right now, this is something that I know I need to be doing better at, because since it's gotten cold the last few weeks, I've kind of gotten bad of like walking Kona in the morning, getting outside. I'm like, I'd rather just like, I'm just going to get some emails done, or I'm going to read my book for, that's what I did this morning. It's like, it's harder to convince yourself, right? But, this is what I talk about with everything and what changes in the winter. Like, we need to make that a priority. And sometimes it unfortunately takes a bad night of sleep or a bad workout or low energy to be like, oh, fuck, okay, I need to take this more serious, right? So understand the power of that, right? Now, when we look at things like light, the second thing I like to look at is food, right? And this is something that also for me personally, I have the hardest time controlling. When you think about food, I think a lot of times people think like, okay, like how I mentioned, like that we're most insulin sensitive during the day. So the best ideal way is to get to majority of your calories during the day. But for some of us, based off cravings and hunger, some of us based off our jobs and our schedule, we don't have the luxury sometimes of being able to get everything we need through that. And I'd much rather somebody focus on getting their nutrients and the amount of calories that they need to thrive versus them just skipping meals because, oh shit, it's dark, right? But from a sleep perspective, also understand that that has a huge impact on circadian rhythm, right? So it's like if you're not eating at all during the day and you start eating all of your food during the nighttime, right? Or it's obviously when the sun's already set, your body starts to switch its clock, right? And you got to remember, like, even the things that your body secretes to break down food for digestion, like those drop tremendously in the middle of the night, right? So, like, having a lot of those things, it also makes your body a little bit less efficient with taking in the calories. At the end of the day, though, the other counter argument to it, though, just to be transparent with you guys, like, total calories is still what we're going to look at. But the impact of the amount of calories you're bringing in or the expenditure of like the thermic effect of food does change a little bit. So like, even though, yes, it's about calories, the things that you won't see behind the curtains that you don't know is the fact that like the amount of food you're taking in, you might not be digesting it all, right? And that inefficiency in that process is going to make it a little bit harder on the nutrition side too. So when you think about food, a big tip that I can give you guys is try to stop eating at least 2 hours, but like I would say 2 to 4 hours before bed. That would be like the most ideal thing for someone that's really struggling with sleep. And remember this, if you're someone that's eating close to bed, but your quality of sleep is still pretty good, that's where this is all a little subjective for me still, then I wouldn't make it such a big thing where you need to stress yourself out, being like, oh shit, like, well, Corey told me this, or like, I heard this, that we need to stop eating. Like, yes, there's a lot of science behind this for optimizing sleep and optimizing digestion. But if you're someone that's sleeping pretty good and you're eating maybe 1 or 2 hours before bed, then it's not the end of the world. But like, I still think the idea of like maybe eating a little lighter or giving yourself a few hours to digest, because like, in the perfect world, I would love to have everybody, myself included, take a little walk or move around after food versus just like sitting down, laying on the couch. But the reality of that is like at nighttime for most of us, it's not going to happen, right? It's as far as like what I see as sustainable. So for me, it's like I prioritize getting as much of my movement and my steps during the day. At night, it's what it is, right? But I know for myself, the cinnamon roll story I gave you, I had one last night after dinner, very late and too close to bed, and it had a dramatic effect on my sleep performance. It had a dramatic effect on my resting heart rate throughout the night. My HRV tanked. Like, it was just a definitely a big negative as far as like my stats and my vitals on how my sleep quality was. And for this morning, I'll be transparent with you guys. It took me a couple hours to kind of get even in the mood of like, okay, I need to wake up. Like, my motivation was just not there. So it's just like, I can tell you based off objective data of what I've looked at, but also subjective feeling that like eating close to bed is one of the worst things you can do. Alcohol, same thing, right? If you're using that as something to sedate you to go to bed, understand that that is one of the easiest ways to completely tank your REM sleep, right? It's going to tank your heart rate variability. It's going to raise your resting heart rate. Trust me, I know it. I'm an avid red wine drinker, so like I can see the data in front of me myself too. Caffeine being another one, right? Ideally trying to do your best to make sure that you're not having caffeine too late in the day. There are some chronotypes that can handle caffeine, and like even though we think about, caffeine, I want to say the half-life is like 6 to 8 hours or something like that, or maybe 4 to 6, whatever it might be, meaning like you're only going to get half of the caffeine out of your body in that time frame. So if you're having a cup of coffee at 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night, or having a lot of caffeine, like, yeah, it's going to have a negative impact on the quality of the sleep too, right? So look at caffeine intake, look at alcohol, look at the timing of the food, understand the importance of light and getting outside, right? Understand the importance of consistent wake and sleep times, right? Then let's look at some of the variables coming back to light that I like to maybe we call these hacks, right? Number one is blue light blocking glasses. I'm a huge fan of these, and I know this from my own subjective, like just use and objective research that like when you have a lot of blue light after the sun sets, you're cutting your melatonin almost in half, right? And that melatonin production and that spike that we want is the thing that's going to allow you to A, feel sleepy, and B, get into a deep stage of sleep right away. So if you're taking in a lot of blue light, you have the lights on all over the house, you have your TV on, your laptop, your phones, you're doom scrolling, whatever it might be, you are setting yourself up for failure for just a lower quality night of sleep, right? So blue light blocking glasses, I think, are just a great hack for you to do. That is something I will say for me, transparently, that I just I go in seasons. And unfortunately, like it takes just 1 or 2 nights of bad sleep to be like, oh yeah, fuck, I need to wear my glasses again. Because sometimes like I'll just put them away in my nightstand, and like if they're not by me in the living room when I'm watching TV at night with my wife, then like I just want to have them on. But it makes a huge difference. And I always tell this story because I've talked about this a handful of times. Like my wife doesn't even like them. Not the fact that she doesn't like it because it's good and it works, but she knows that like you got like 30 minutes left with me, and then I'm crashed out on the couch, right? So second thing to that, which is not blue light blockers, but is also just changing, your light bulbs, right? So incandescent light bulbs, using more candles. We have red light, I don't forget what the company's called. You get these on Amazon now, but like the near and far infrared red lights, right? So we have like the red light bulbs in our bedroom. Those are not going to impact because it's not blue light, right? When you think about the spectrum of light, that bright blue light that we get in the peak of the middle of the day, that is what's giving us as much of a cortisol release as we can get, because that's the thing that wakes us up, right? It energizes us as far as light goes. Now, when you think about the healing properties and the more restorative properties of light in the spectrum, that's where you're getting into those deep red, infrared, far infrared light. So having more of that stuff around the house, incandescent bulbs, candles, red lights, it allows you to have lights on because you don't need to look like a weirdo having your lights off all the night, because like especially this time of year, it's dark at 5:30. Now, let's talk about the reality of this. Most of us are going to have lights on because we need to cook, we need to finish up with the kids' homework, we need to finish up our own work, or we're watching TV. This is why, hence, I always say, try to shut as many of the lights off as you can. Like, you don't need to have every single light on in the house, period. My wife generally doesn't like that because I'll start shutting things off. She's like, oh, I'm not done working. I'm like, I know, I'm not shutting them off. I'm just like going to keep 1 or 2 on. But like, as the thing starts to become darker, so does the brain. Everything starts to quiet down. You start to get sleepy. But the blue light blockers for sure are going to be the number one thing there. And then when you look in the bedroom, right? Number one thing, try to keep your room anywhere from like 60 to 68 degrees, right? Having a cool room is going to allow you to actually get into these deeper stages of sleep as well. When you think about, like, I was actually looking this up this is probably like a month or 2 ago, actually, but like the sauna and the cold plunge, I was like, oh, I wonder if like the cold plunge actually helps me get into deeper stages. And it was actually the opposite, right? The fact that I do a cold plunge sometimes after work, or all the time after work, but sometimes a little bit later in the night than I like to, it requires my body to now naturally heat itself back up versus the opposite, right? If I were to do sauna only, or a warm bath, or a warm hot shower, your actually body's natural kind of process after that is to cool itself down, right? So even little things like that, like late at night, taking a nice hot or warm shower or bath is going to be something that's going to allow your body to start naturally cooling itself down. We want to sleep cool. I don't know how you guys are, but for me, it's like I sleep terribly when I'm hot. I need a fan on, I need an AC on, I need the sound. That was going to be my next one, is obviously for you guys, if you're sensitive to audio, right? Like if it's anything in the house, right? Like for me, it's like I like the sound of an AC or a fan, but a lot of times I wear earplugs. I don't like hearing the trash guy come on Wednesday mornings at 5:30 in the morning. That wakes me up and throws me in a loop. So sometimes light, right? Like I have blackout curtains in my house, or in our bedroom, I'm sorry. I'll wear an eye mask sometimes. So like, I think the more variables that you can block out as far as sound, as far as visual, those type of things, is going to help optimize you staying in that sleep, right? And that's the thing, right? It's like sometimes getting there is not the issue. It's staying there for a lot of us, right? Look at all those variables, right? Look at the temperature, look at the lights, look at controlling the audio, right? If you want to get really nerdy and biohacker, it's like get your phones out of the room, turn your Wi-Fi off for some of the EMF. I think that's a little woohoo sometimes for me, but if you're someone that likes to go down that rabbit hole and be as extreme as possible to optimize that, then yeah, go for it. Put your put your phone on airplane mode, right? Unplug the Wi-Fi router, or set it on a timer so it's not on from 11 to 5 or whatever your sleep windows are. Like the more things that you can remove, the better. Now, that being said, I do like to be like, honest with myself that like sometimes the more effort I put into optimizing it almost can create a borderline level of anxiety. And I think awareness is a fine line of creating anxiety for some people, depending on how you're looking at it. But like, just understand no matter what, even if you do all the right things, that like sleep is never going to be 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's going to be perfect. There's going to be days where you don't sleep well. There's not. For me, like the two things that I wanted to finish up today's episode on that I think are the biggest changes for me in sleep. Number one, managing your stress. When I'm stressed out, I know that it's just one of those things that like my brain has a hard time shutting off, right? I remember, and I go through this every time I was going through a build out of the gym, I would go through like weeks or months of it, right? Where I would wake up at 3 o'clock and I would start thinking like, oh shit, okay, maybe if I call the guy for the permit in the morning, or maybe I gotta go do this, like I would start thinking, right? So, and that is just an aspect of stress. It doesn't matter if it's anxiety, depression, stress. A lot of the research is obviously backing that up to show us that like when we're in these stages of life or in that season of life, that it's obviously going to have a negative impact on stress. So I'm not going to get too down the rabbit hole of like why and how to manage stress, but like understand that is a huge impact on it. Second thing, which I always say this when I'm doing flat, when like I like to share stories of like what works well for people to help them sleep, right? Is it like, is it your little bedtime tea, or what's your routine? What's your wind down routine? For me, one of the things that also helps me sleep, which also I think is a byproduct of helping me manage stress, is productivity. When I'm taking action and I'm productive throughout the day, I feel accomplished. So mentally, I don't feel as stressed because I did something productive that day. I wasn't busy, I was productive, and there is a big difference between that. And like that in itself allows me to have less stress going to bed, and also allows me to sleep better. It's just something personally is like a little personal anecdote that I've noticed about myself is like, if I'm not productive, there's something just in the back of my head that's like, and whatever I'm going through a season, if I'm shopping for something or doing something or trying to build something new for the business or whatever it might be, my brain won't really shut off until I really accomplish what I'm trying to do, or at least take a lot of productive actionable steps towards it, right? So I don't want to make this episode too long. I think we covered a decent amount so far. But like when you guys look at sleep, just understand that the priority of sleep should be the number one thing that you do, because I think it also, for some of us, can be a very, very easy fix because it's just little things and little quote unquote hacks that you need to do throughout the day to obviously do that, right? So it's moving enough. So you're actually obviously working out. I always like to say to people, it's in the name. Working in is restoration. Working out is getting things out of you. If you're not moving a lot throughout the day, there's a lot of people that I know that are not motivated throughout the day, that are not like having a lot of energy and not moving. And then suddenly when they try to go to bed when their body's tired, their brain's not tired, right? So there's a physical part, but there's also a mental part. And I think getting that stuff out of you by working out and being productive and moving throughout the day and getting light and doing those things are going to help you sleep. But I will just tell you, just do not underestimate the power of light. Light is one of those biggest things. Second thing is, do not underestimate the timing of your food. Not necessarily so much of like, if you're eating the same amount of calories and you put them all at night or you put them all in the morning, sure, you're going to see results on both sides if you're eating whatever the goal might be. But over time, you're going to start to see a negative impact on one side. And the reason why is because you're impacting your sleep and you're impacting the timing of your hormones. You're impacting your circadian rhythm. And over time, that's going to change. Like even with sleep deprivation, your basal metabolic rate does drop a little bit, right? Your what was it called? Non-exercise activity drops a little bit, right? So you actually burn less calories throughout the day because your body is always just going to be your best defense mechanism. So it's always going through ways to find strategies to help optimize conservation of energy so we can actually stay alive. That's what the body and the brain is designed to do. So look at all those variables in life. And I think for you, like I just threw a lot at you guys, but I want you to pick like, what are the things like, okay, maybe I am right. Maybe like instead of that second coffee after lunch, maybe I make that a decaf, or I make that a tea. Maybe instead of having my dinner later, I have my dinner earlier. Maybe by having dinner earlier, the way that I do it is I have breakfast earlier. Because like for me, if I skip breakfast, then I'll have a later breakfast that day. Then I naturally would just have a later dinner. But if I move all my food up in the day, so by having an earlier dinner, it's actually by moving everything up, right? Maybe trying to force yourself to eat a little bit more in the morning and less at night so you have a smaller meal. Obviously, alcohol, no matter who you talk to, this is just like an easy one to understand. That like it's definitely a net negative when it comes to sleep, right? There's maybe a glass of wine or red wine. It's not going to have like me for me, like my cap is like two. It's like I can have one or two glasses of red wine. It's not going to really have much of an impact at all on my sleep and how I feel the next day. Anything past that, if I go out, if I go for a date night, if I'm on a holiday, if I'm on a weekend, I drink a little bit more. It is just a guaranteed that it's just going to have a little bit of it, a little bit, or more importantly, a lot of an impact on my sleep. All right, guys. Well, like I said, I don't want to ramble on too much, so I hope you got some good nuggets from that one. Take that, and I'll see you guys next week.